I never thought I'd be the type of person to stand up in a room full of lawyers and call my own sister a liar. But when she claimed our grandparents had promised her everything, the estate, the heirlooms, even my childhood memories, something inside me finally broke. The day I unfolded that yellowed piece of paper was the day I learned that sometimes justice has been waiting silently in a drawer for decades, just waiting for you to find your voice. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. It was a crisp autumn morning when I got the call that would change everything. The maple trees outside my apartment window were ablaze with red and gold, a beautiful contrast to the gray clouds gathering above. I was hunched over my laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard as I tried to finish a deadline for my graphic design business when my phone lit up. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. Hello? I balanced the phone between my ear and shoulder, still typing. Am I speaking with Cassandra Mitchell? The voice was formal, clipped, unfamiliar. Yes, this is she. I saved my work, something in the caller's tone making me pause. Ms. Mitchell, this is Howard Blackwood from Blackwood, Turner and Associates. I'm afraid I have some difficult news. Your grandmother, Eleanor Mitchell, passed away yesterday evening in her sleep. My fingers froze above the keyboard. The world seemed to slow, sounds becoming distant, as if I were suddenly underwater. Grandma Eleanor was gone. The woman who taught me to bake strawberry shortcake, who showed me how to thread a needle, who had been my constant supporter when my parents divorced and my life had splintered into before and after. Ms. Mitchell, are you still there? Yes, I whispered, my voice cracking. I'm sorry, this is unexpected. She seemed fine when I visited last week. The doctors believe it was a heart attack. Peaceful, they said. Mr. Blackwood's voice softened slightly. I understand this is difficult. Your grandmother was a client of our firm for many years. She had requested that, in the event of her passing, we contact you directly. My mind stuttered over his words. Contact me directly? Not my sister Vanessa, who lived just 10 minutes from Grandma's estate? Not my cousin Richard, who had moved into the guest house 2 years ago, claiming he needed to keep an eye on the old girl? There are matters regarding her estate that need to be addressed, Mr. Blackwood continued. Would you be available to come to our offices tomorrow at 11 a.m.? There will be a formal reading of the will, and your presence is specifically requested. I swallowed hard, trying to process everything through the fog of grief already, settling over me. Of course. I'll be there. Excellent. The address is 1470 Westbrook Avenue, downtown. 8th floor. My condolences on your loss, Ms. Mitchell. The call ended, and I sat motionless, staring at my computer screen without seeing it. Grandma Eleanor was gone. Sweet, stubborn, elegant Eleanor Mitchell, who at 86 still insisted on tending her own rose garden and hosting monthly bridge tournaments. The last of my grandparents, and in many ways, the person who had raised me after Mom retreated into a shell of depression following the divorce. I picked up my phone again, my hands trembling slightly as I dialed my sister's number. Vanessa and I weren't close, hadn't been since we were teenagers, but she deserved to hear about Grandma from family, not a lawyer. She answered on the 4th ring. Cassie, this is unexpected. Her voice held that familiar note of impatience, as if my call was an interruption to something far more important. Vanessa, I just got a call. It's about Grandma Eleanor. My voice broke on her name. She passed away yesterday. Silence stretched across the line. Then, I know. 2 words, flat and emotionless. I frowned, confusion momentarily cutting through my grief. You know? How did you... Richard called me last night. He was there when it happened. The way she said it carried an undercurrent of accusation. Where were you? Mr. Blackwood just Called me, I said. There's a reading of the will tomorrow at 11, at his office downtown. Another pause. I'm aware of that too. Richard and I have already spoken with Howard. We've been handling everything. Her emphasis on we was unmistakable, drawing a line between those who had been there and those who hadn't, namely, me. I didn't realize you knew Howard Blackwood, I said carefully. There's a lot you don't realize, Cassie. You've been so busy with your little drawing business that you've hardly visited in months. I bit back a sharp response. My little drawing business was a successful graphic design firm that had clients across 3 states, and I had visited Grandma Eleanor just last week, bringing her fresh scones from her favorite bakery and spending the afternoon listening to her stories about Grandpa William's adventures in the Merchant Marines. Anyway, Vanessa continued briskly, don't worry about the funeral arrangements. Richard and I have it under control. The service will be on Saturday at Greenwood, and we've already spoken to Pastor Collins. Don't you think I should be involved in those decisions? I asked, my grief making way for irritation. Honestly, Cassie, what would be the point? You're 3 hours away and we've already made all the arrangements, unless you're planning to move back. Of course I'm coming back for the funeral, Vanessa. That's not what I meant. Her tone sharpened. Richard and I have discussed it, and someone will need to take care of the estate, the house, the property. It all needs managing. Richard is already living in the guest house and my kids adore visiting Greenfields. It makes sense for us to oversee things. I felt a chill. That had nothing to do with grief. Oversee things? Grandma's not even. The will hasn't even been read yet. Please, Cassie. Vanessa's laugh was brittle. Let's not pretend we don't know how this goes. Grandma and I spoke extensively about her wishes. She wanted the estate. To stay in the family. To be preserved for future generations. You've built your life in the city. You've made it clear where your priorities lie. The implication stung. Yes, I'd moved away for college and stayed to build my business, but I'd never abandoned my family. I'd called Grandma weekly, visited as often as I could drive the 3 hours each way. Meanwhile, Vanessa had the convenience of proximity, but often went weeks without stopping by unless she needed something. I'll see you at the reading tomorrow, I said, unwilling to argue with her so soon after learning of Grandma's death. Fine. But don't get your hopes up about the estate, Cassie. Grandma and I had an understanding. She hung up before I could respond, leaving me staring at my phone in disbelief. An understanding? What was that supposed to mean? I spent the rest of the day in a daze, alternating between bouts of tears and frantic work as I rescheduled client meetings and arranged to be away from my office for at least a week. By evening, my apartment felt too small, too quiet, the walls closing in with memories of Grandma Eleanor. On an impulse, I threw some clothes into a suitcase, locked up my apartment, and began the 3-hour drive to Willow Creek, the small town where I'd grown up, and where Greenfields, my grandparents' estate, stood on 10 acres of the most beautiful land in the county. The drive gave me time to think, to process. Grandma Eleanor had been my anchor since childhood. When my parents' marriage imploded spectacularly during my 10th year, Mom had retreated into herself, barely functioning through her depression. Dad had moved across the country for a fresh start with his new girlfriend, sending birthday cards and occasional phone calls, but little else. It was Grandma who had stepped in, picking me up from school, helping with homework, making sure I had proper meals and clean clothes. Vanessa, 4 years older, had gone a different route. She'd attached herself to the popular crowd, spending as little time at home as possible. While I found solace in art and in Grandma's quiet strength, Vanessa sought validation from peers and, later, from men with fast cars and smooth talk. By the time she was 20, she'd married and divorced Bradley Hall, the son of the wealthiest family in Willow Creek. A year later, she'd married Todd Prescott, who came with old family money and a sprawling house in the best part of town. Our paths had diverged so completely that sometimes it was hard to believe we'd grown up in the same household, And now, with Grandma gone, it seemed those paths were about to collide over green fields. It was nearly midnight when I pulled up. The long, tree-lined driveway to the estate. The grand old Victorian house stood silhouetted against the night sky, its turrets and wraparound porch just as I remembered. A light burned in one of the downstairs windows, the library where Grandma spent her evenings reading. For a heartbreaking moment, I imagined her still there, glasses perched on her nose, waiting for me to come in from the cold. The guest house, a smaller but still elegant structure about 100 yards from the main house, was dark. Richard's car wasn't in its usual spot, which was strange. Where was my cousin, who supposedly had been there when it happened? I used my key to let myself into the main house, the familiar creak of the front door welcoming me home. The entryway light was on, casting a warm glow over the antique console table, where Grandma always kept a bowl of potpourri that smelled of roses and cinnamon. I inhaled deeply, tears pricking my eyes as her scent enveloped me. "Hello?" I called. Softly, not expecting an answer but feeling strange about entering silently now that she was gone. To my shock, a figure appeared in the doorway to the library. "About time you showed up." Vanessa stood there, arms crossed, wearing designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, not a strand out of place despite the late hour. "Vanessa, what are you doing here?" I set my suitcase down, confusion replacing my momentary alarm. "I could ask you the same thing. The funeral isn't until Saturday, and the will reading is tomorrow in town. There was no need for you to drive all the way here tonight." Her tone suggested I'd done something inappropriate, rather than come to mourn my grandmother in the home where I'd spent much of my childhood. "I wanted to be here," I said simply. "This was her home. I need to be close to her right now." Vanessa's expression softened fractionally. "Well, I've been sorting through some of her personal items. Nothing valuable," she added, quickly. "Just organizing things for afterward." A twinge of unease rippled through me. "Don't you think we should wait until after the will is read? Some of those things might have specific destinations." "Please, Cassie, I know what I'm doing. Grandma and I discussed all of this." She gestured vaguely around the room. She knew I would take care of everything properly. There it was again, that claim of an understanding between them. Something didn't feel right, but I was too exhausted and grief-stricken to argue. "Where's Richard?" I asked instead, changing the subject. "I thought he lived in the guest house now." A flash of something, irritation, concern, crossed Vanessa's face. "He's staying with a friend in town for a few days. He was quite upset after finding Grandma." That made sense, at least. "And you? Aren't you going home to Todd and the kids tonight?" "I've been staying here since it happened," she said, lifting her chin slightly as if daring me to challenge her right to be there. "Someone needed to be on the property." "I see." I picked up my suitcase again. "Well, I'll be staying too. In my old room, if that's all right with you." "It's not really up to me, is it?" Vanessa said with a brittle smile. "At least not until tomorrow." The implication hung in the air between us, heavy and unspoken. Not until the will is read. Not until Grandma's wishes are known. Not until Vanessa's understanding is confirmed. "Good night, Vanessa," I said tiredly, unwilling to engage. "I'll see you in the morning." I climbed the grand staircase slowly, each step bringing back memories of racing up and down as a child, of helping Grandma navigate them carefully in her later years. The second-floor hallway was lined with family photos, 4 generations of Mitchells captured in sepia tones and black and white, gradually transitioning to color as they approached the present. I paused at a photo of Grandma and Grandpa on their wedding day, their young faces alight with joy and promise. "I miss you." "Already," I whispered, touching the frame gently before continuing to my old bedroom at the end of the hall. The room was just as I'd left it during my last visit. The twin bed with its patchwork quilt, the desk by the window where I'd spent countless hours drawing and dreaming, the bookshelf still filled with my childhood favorites. Grandma had preserved it perfectly, like a museum exhibit of my youth. I set my suitcase down and went to the window, drawing back the curtains to look out at the grounds of Greenfields. The moon had emerged from behind the clouds, casting silver light across the gardens and the small orchard beyond. In the distance, I could see the old gazebo where Grandpa William had proposed to Grandma Eleanor 68 years ago. Would all of this really go to Vanessa? Had Grandma truly intended for the estate to pass solely to my sister, who valued it more for its monetary worth and status than for the memories it held? It seemed impossible to believe, and yet Vanessa's confidence was unsettling. Tomorrow would bring answers, but for tonight, I needed rest. I changed into pajamas and climbed into the familiar bed, pulling Grandma's handmade quilt up to my chin. Despite my exhaustion, sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Grandma's face, heard her voice, felt the gentle press of her hand against my cheek as she told me during our last visit, "You are so much stronger than you know, my Cassandra. Remember that." At the time, I'd thought it was just one of her typical affirmations, the kind she'd been giving me since childhood. Now, I wondered if there had been more to it, a message, perhaps, or a warning. Morning came too quickly, gray light filtering through the curtains I'd forgotten to close. I showered and dressed carefully in a simple black dress and my grandmother's pearl earrings, a gift for my 25th birthday. When I went downstairs, Vanessa was already in the kitchen, immaculately dressed in a designer suit, scrolling through her phone while sipping coffee from one of Grandma's delicate china cups. "There's coffee in the pot," she said without looking up. "We need to leave by 10:30 to make it to Blackwood's office on time." "Good morning to you, too," I muttered, pouring myself a cup. "Have you spoken to Richard this morning? Is he meeting us there?" Vanessa set her phone down with a sigh. "Yes, Richard will be at the reading. So will Todd and a few others." "Others? Like who?" "Pastor Collins, for one. He and Grandma were close through the church, and I believe Howard mentioned someone from the Historical Society." She shrugged. "Grandma was involved in a lot of community organizations. It's not surprising she included them in her will." That made sense. Eleanor Mitchell had been a pillar of the Willow Creek community, serving on various boards and committees well into her 80s. We finished our coffee in uncomfortable silence, each lost in our own thoughts. At 10:30, we left in separate cars, Vanessa in her luxury SUV, me in my practical compact. The drive to downtown Willow Creek took only 15 minutes, but it felt like hours, my stomach knotting with anxiety about what awaited us at the law office. Blackwood, Turner and Associates occupied the top floor of the tallest building in town, a modest 4-story structure that had been there since the 1950s. The elevator creaked its way up to the 8th floor, opening onto a reception area decorated in dark wood and leather, exuding old-money professionalism. "Ms. Mitchell and Ms. Mitchell," the receptionist greeted us with a polite smile. "Everyone is gathered in the conference room. Please, follow me." We were led down a short hallway to a large room dominated by a mahogany table. Several people were already seated. Richard, looking uncomfortable in a suit that didn't quite fit. Todd, Vanessa's husband, impeccably dressed as always. Pastor Collins, whose kind face brightened when he saw me. And 2 women I didn't recognize. One in her 60s with the distinct look of a librarian, the other younger, clutching a legal pad. At the head of the table stood Howard Blackwood, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He nodded in greeting as we entered. "Now that everyone has arrived, we can begin," he said, gesturing for us to take the 2 empty seats. I ended up directly across from Vanessa, with Richard to my left. "First, Let me express my condolences on the loss of Eleanor Mitchell, Mr. Blackwood began formally. She was not only a valued client, but a friend of this firm for over 40 years. She was a remarkable woman who knew her own mind and made her wishes explicitly clear. He opened a folder in front of him, extracting a document that I recognized as a will. This is the last will and testament of Eleanor Grace Mitchell, dated June 15th of last year, superseding all previous wills and codicils. Vanessa leaned forward slightly, a confident smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Beside her, Todd looked equally assured. Richard, in contrast, seemed nervous, his fingers drumming a quiet rhythm on the table. I'll begin with the specific bequests before addressing the matter of the estate itself, Mr. Blackwood continued. To Pastor James Collins, Eleanor leaves her collection of first edition hymn books and a donation of $50,000 to the Church Restoration Fund. Pastor Collins bowed his head, murmuring a quiet thank you. To the Willow Creek Historical Society, represented today by Ms. Margaret Winters. He nodded to the older woman I didn't know. Eleanor bequeaths her collection of historical documents relating to the founding of Willow Creek, currently housed in the library at Greenfields, along with $25,000 for their preservation. Ms. Winters dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. To Richard Mitchell, her nephew. Mr. Blackwood's eyes moved to my cousin. Eleanor leaves her late husband's collection of maritime artifacts and memorabilia, along with a sum of $100,000 with the stipulation that he use it to further his education or establish a business of his own. Richard's eyes widened in surprise. It was a generous gift, but clearly not what he had been expecting. To Vanessa Prescott, her granddaughter, Mr. Blackwood continued, and I felt the room grow tense as all eyes turned to my sister. Eleanor leaves her collection of fine jewelry, with the exception of the pearl earrings gifted to Cassandra, and a sum of $200,000. Vanessa's confident smile faltered slightly. Is that all? She asked, her voice tight. Mr. Blackwood peered at her over his glasses. For specific bequests, yes, Mrs. Prescott. Now, regarding the disposition of Greenfields itself, including the main house, guest house, all land and remaining contents. He paused, and I swear I could hear my own heartbeat in the silence that followed. Eleanor has left detailed instructions, which I will read verbatim. Greenfields has been the heart of our family for 4 generations. It has witnessed births and deaths, celebrations and sorrows. It is not merely property to be owned, but a legacy to be preserved. Therefore, I establish the Mitchell Family Trust with the following provisions. Beside me, Richard shifted in his seat. Across the table, Vanessa's knuckles whitened as she gripped the edge. The Mitchell Family Trust will own and maintain Greenfields in perpetuity, preserving it as both a family home and a historical landmark. The trust will be administered by my granddaughter, Cassandra Mitchell, whose appreciation for both the property's history and its future has always aligned with my own vision. The words hung in the air for a moment before their meaning registered. All eyes turned to me as shock rendered me momentarily speechless. Cassandra will have full rights to live on the property and make decisions regarding its use and maintenance, with the following conditions. First, the guest house shall remain available to family members in need of temporary accommodation at the discretion of the trustee. Second, the gardens and grounds shall be open to the public on selected days each year for the benefit of the Willow Creek community. Third, the principal amount of the trust, totaling approximately $4 million, shall remain intact, with only the interest and investment proceeds to be used for maintenance and preservation. The room had gone completely still. I was aware of Vanessa's face, drained of color, her expression a mixture of shock and fury. This decision has not been made lightly, Mr. Blackwood continued reading, nor is it a reflection of my affection, which has always been equal for both my granddaughters. Rather, it is based on my observation of their characters and values over time. Cassandra has consistently demonstrated the care, responsibility, and appreciation for heritage that Greenfields requires of its caretaker. Vanessa stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is ridiculous. Grandma and I had an understanding. She promised me. Mrs. Prescott, Mr. Blackwood interrupted firmly, I assure you that Eleanor was of sound mind when she made these decisions. In fact, she anticipated your reaction and left a personal letter for you, which I'll provide after we conclude the formal reading. Vanessa remained standing, trembling slightly, while Todd placed a restraining hand on her arm. Sit down, Van, he murmured. Let's hear it all first. She sank back into her chair, eyes blazing with anger and humiliation. Mr. Blackwood cleared his throat and continued. To my granddaughter Vanessa, I leave this explanation. Your happiness has always been important to me, but I have watched with concern as material wealth became increasingly central to your sense of self-worth. Greenfields needs a caretaker, not an owner. It needs someone who values its soul, not its price tag. I hope in time you will understand that this decision is made with love, not judgment. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hardly process what I was hearing. Grandma had left me responsible for Greenfields? For preserving the family legacy? The task seemed enormous, overwhelming. There are additional details regarding the structure of the trust, Mr. Blackwood said into the silence, which we can discuss privately with Ms. Cassandra Mitchell at her convenience. Are there any questions about the will as read? This is bullshit, Vanessa hissed, tears of anger in her eyes. Grandma would never do this to me. She knew how much I loved Greenfields. She promised me. What exactly did she promise you? Mrs. Prescott? Mr. Blackwood asked mildly. That the estate would stay in the family, that my children would grow up there like we did. And they can visit, as the will specifies. The property remains in the family through the trust. Your children will always have access to their heritage. That's not the same thing, and you know it, Vanessa spat, turning her fury toward me. This is your doing, isn't it, Cassie? You manipulated her, turned her against me somehow. I could only shake my head, still too stunned to form a coherent defense. I assure you, Mrs. Prescott, Mr. Blackwood interjected firmly, that Eleanor's decision was entirely her own. In fact, she updated her will following several conversations with you last spring regarding your plans for the property. What plans? I asked, finding my voice at last. Mr. Blackwood glanced at Vanessa, then back to me. It's not my place to say. Perhaps your sister would like to explain. All eyes turned to Vanessa, who flushed deeply. It was just talk, she said defensively. Preliminary discussions with a developer who was interested in the land. Nothing was decided. A developer? I echoed in disbelief. You were planning to sell Greenfields to a developer? For what? Condos? A shopping center? Don't be so dramatic, Cassie. It was a luxury housing development. Very exclusive, very tasteful. The house itself would have remained intact as a centerpiece, and the money would have set our family up for generations. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. No wonder Grandma had updated her will. The thought of Greenfields carved up into luxury housing plots would have horrified her. Is there anything else, Mr. Blackwood? I asked quietly, unable to look at my sister. Just this, he said, sliding an envelope across the table to me. A personal letter from your grandmother, to be opened in private. He distributed similar envelopes to Vanessa and Richard, then closed his folder. Unless there are other questions, that concludes the formal reading of the will. The meeting broke up quickly after that. Pastor Collins squeezed my hand in passing, murmuring, She chose wisely, Cassandra. Ms. Winters from the Historical Society gave me her card, suggesting we meet soon to discuss the documents she'd be cataloging. Richard disappeared without speaking to anyone. Vanessa and Todd remained seated at the table, heads bent close together in intense discussion. As I gathered my things to leave, Vanessa looked up, her eyes cold. "This isn't over, Cassie," she said quietly. "Grandma wasn't in her right mind. We both know that." "That's not true, and you know it," I replied, surprising myself with my steadiness. "Grandma was sharp until the end. She knew exactly what she was doing." "We'll see about that," Todd interjected smoothly. "There are ways to contest a will, especially when there's evidence of undue influence." "Undue influence?" I repeated incredulously. "I lived 3 hours away and visited when I could. Vanessa had access to Grandma every day if she wanted it. If anyone had the opportunity to exert influence, it wasn't me." "Yet somehow you ended up with everything," Vanessa said bitterly. "Funny how that worked out." "I'd had enough." "I didn't end up with everything, Vanessa. I've been made the caretaker of our family's legacy. There's a difference. Maybe if you'd seen Greenfields as something other than a potential payday, things would be different." Leaving them at the table, I walked out of the conference room. With my head high, Grandma's letter clutched in my hand. In the elevator, alone at last, I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes, overwhelmed by everything that had happened. The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders, not just for a property, but for a legacy. Grandma had trusted me with something precious, something she believed I would protect and nurture as she had. I couldn't let her down. As the elevator doors opened to the lobby, I straightened my shoulders and took a deep breath. The battle with Vanessa was just beginning, I was sure of it. But for the first time in my life, I felt ready to stand my ground. Grandma's words echoed in my mind. "You are so much stronger than you know, my Cassandra. Remember that." And I finally understood what she'd been trying to tell me all along. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I drove back to Greenfields with my mind spinning, the manila envelope containing Grandma's letter sitting on the passenger seat beside me. The trees lining the country road seemed to bend toward me in the autumn breeze, as if sharing secrets. I was only beginning to understand. I couldn't bring myself to open the letter yet. It felt too personal, too final, to be read while operating a vehicle. When I pulled into the long driveway of the estate, I was surprised to see several cars parked haphazardly near the front steps. I recognized Richard's beat-up sedan and, with a sinking feeling, Vanessa's SUV. Somehow she and Todd had beaten me back to Greenfields, despite leaving the attorney's office after I did. There was also a vehicle I didn't recognize, a sleek black Mercedes with tinted windows. The front door stood wide open, voices drifting out into the crisp afternoon air. I hesitated, Grandma's letter still clutched in my hand. Part of me wanted to retreat, to find somewhere quiet to read her final words to me before facing whatever storm awaited inside. But another part, a stronger part I hadn't recognized in myself before, propelled me forward. This was my responsibility now. Running away wouldn't solve anything. As I walked through the door, the voices grew louder, coming from the direction of Grandma's library. I followed the sound, my heart hammering against my ribs. Completely ridiculous. She was confused in her final months. Anyone could see that. Vanessa's voice, shrill with indignation. "Mrs. Prescott, I assure you, we performed all due diligence." An unfamiliar male voice, smooth and professional. "Mrs. Mitchell was evaluated by 2 independent physicians and found to be of completely sound mind when she updated her will last year." Then she was manipulated. Cassie must have gotten to her somehow, filled her head with... Vanessa stopped abruptly as I appeared in the doorway. The library, Grandma's sanctuary, with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and comfortable leather chairs, had been transformed into an impromptu war room. Vanessa and Todd stood on one side of Grandma's antique desk, facing a tall man in an expensive suit whom I didn't recognize. Richard slouched in a corner armchair, looking distinctly uncomfortable. And perched on the window seat, scrolling through her phone with practiced indifference, was a young woman in a pencil skirt and blazer, who I guessed to be someone's assistant. "Well, speak of the devil," Vanessa said coldly. "Come to survey your kingdom?" "This isn't a kingdom, Vanessa. It's our family home." I stepped fully into the room, noting how everyone but Richard seemed to straighten at my entrance. "What's going on here?" The stranger extended his hand. "Ms. Mitchell, I presume?" "Maxwell Durant, of Durant Legal Associates. I specialize in estate disputes." I didn't take his hand. "And why is an estate dispute lawyer in my grandmother's house less than 2 hours after her will was read?" "Your sister has concerns about the validity of the will," Durant replied smoothly, withdrawing, his hand without embarrassment. "Given the unusual circumstances and the significant assets involved, she's well within her rights to explore her options." "Unusual circumstances?" I echoed, looking directly at Vanessa. "You mean the fact that Grandma didn't give you what you wanted? That's not unusual. That's just disappointing. For you." Vanessa's face flushed. "You have no idea what you're talking about. Grandma and I had an agreement about Greenfields. She promised me—" "She promised you what, exactly?" I interrupted, my patience wearing thin. "Because, according to Mr. Blackwood, she changed her will after learning about your plans to sell this place to developers. Plans you never bothered to discuss with anyone else in the family." "It was a preliminary discussion," Todd interjected, his corporate lawyer voice in full effect. "And frankly, it made financial sense. This property is worth millions in today's market, especially with its acreage and location. Maintaining it costs a fortune, and for what? Sentimentality?" "For legacy," I said firmly. "For family history. For preserving something meaningful instead of turning it into a quick profit." Durant cleared his throat. "These emotional arguments are precisely why we have courts to settle such matters objectively. Mrs. Prescott has legitimate grounds for contesting this will. The sudden change in inheritance pattern, the unusual trust structure." "The trust wasn't unusual at all," came a new voice from the doorway. We all turned to see Howard Blackwood standing there, his briefcase in hand. In fact, Eleanor Mitchell worked with our firm for months to establish it precisely to her specifications. Every I was dotted, every T crossed. Relief flooded through me at the sight of him. "Mr. Blackwood, I didn't expect to see you here." "I thought my presence might be necessary," he said, nodding toward Durant. "Maxwell, I'm surprised to see you involved so quickly. The will was only read 2 hours ago." Durant shrugged. "Mrs. Prescott called our office last week to discuss her options. She had concerns about her grandmother's state of mind." "Last week?" I stared at Vanessa in disbelief. "Grandma was still alive last week. You were already planning to contest her will before she even died?" Vanessa had the grace to look embarrassed, but only briefly. I knew something was wrong. She'd been acting strangely, making comments about safeguarding Greenfields and choosing the right guardian. It was obvious someone had gotten to her. Or, Mr. Blackwood suggested dryly, she simply recognized the threat to her home after your discussions with Westlake Development Group. "Yes, Mrs. Prescott, she told me all about those meetings. She was quite distressed to learn that you had already shown the property to developers without her knowledge or consent." The room went silent. Todd shifted uncomfortably, and Vanessa's confident facade cracked slightly. "Now," Mr. Blackwood continued, "as Eleanor's attorney for over 30 years, I can state unequivocally that she was of sound mind when she updated her will. We have extensive documentation to that effect, including video recordings of our meetings where she explicitly outlined her wishes and her reasons for them." "Video recordings?" Durant looked slightly less confident. "Indeed, Eleanor was nothing, if not thorough." She anticipated this exact scenario and took steps to ensure her wishes couldn't be misrepresented. Mr. Blackwood turned to me. "Ms. Mitchell, I apologize for arriving unannounced, but I thought you might appreciate having these documents immediately. They include the full trust paperwork and several items your grandmother wanted you to have without delay." He placed his briefcase on the desk and opened it, extracting a thick folder which he handed to me. "The access codes to the safe in the master bedroom are inside, along with the contact information for the trust's financial advisors." Vanessa took a step forward. "Wait a minute. What safe? What's in it?" Mr. Blackwood regarded her coolly. "Family documents, Mrs. Prescott. Birth certificates, deeds, and other items Mrs. Mitchell deemed important enough to secure." "I should have access to those, too," Vanessa insisted. "Anything that belonged to Grandma should be examined before decisions are made about where things go." "Actually," Mr. Blackwood corrected, "as trustee, Ms. Cassandra Mitchell now has sole legal authority over this property and its contents. Any removal of items without her consent would constitute theft." The implication hung in the air. I suddenly wondered if Vanessa had already been sorting through Grandma's possessions with more than organization in mind. Durant cleared his throat. "Be that as it may, we intend to file for a temporary injunction preventing any disposal of assets until the will contest is resolved." "You're welcome to try," Mr. Blackwood replied, unperturbed. "But I should warn you that Eleanor anticipated such maneuvers as well. The trust was established as an irrevocable entity 6 months ago, with an initial funding of over $3 million. Even if you contest the will, the trust stands as a separate legal entity." I watched Vanessa's face as the implications of this sank in. Grandma hadn't just written a will, she'd created a legal fortress around Greenfields, protecting it from exactly the kind of challenge Vanessa was mounting. "This is ridiculous," Vanessa finally said, her voice tight with anger. "I'm her granddaughter, too. I have children, her great-grandchildren. She wouldn't just cut us out like this." "She didn't cut you out," I pointed out. "You received jewelry and $200,000. That's hardly being disinherited. Compared to what you got, it's a joke." Vanessa's control finally snapped. "You got everything that matters. The house, the land, the trust fund, all of it. What did I ever do to deserve being treated like this?" The question hung in the air, her raw emotion filling the room. For a moment, I glimpsed the hurt child beneath Vanessa's polished exterior. The girl who had always felt she needed to prove her worth through material success, who measured love in dollar signs and square footage. "Perhaps," Mr. Blackwood suggested gently, "you should read your grandmother's letter before drawing conclusions about her motivations." Vanessa's hand went to her purse, where she'd presumably placed the sealed envelope she'd received at the reading. I touched the similar envelope in my pocket, still unopened. "I suggest we all take some time to regroup," Mr. Blackwood continued. "The funeral is still ahead of us, and Eleanor would have wanted her family to come together in grief, not divide over property." "That's exactly what I've been saying," Richard spoke up for the first time, rising from his chair. "This is insane. Grandma Eleanor isn't even buried yet, and we're already fighting over her stuff. She would hate this." His simple statement hit me like a physical blow. He was right. Grandma would be devastated to see us like this, circling each other like combatants rather than coming together as family to mourn her passing. "Richard's right," I said quietly. "This isn't the time. We should be planning her funeral, remembering her life, not arguing over what she left behind." Vanessa's expression hardened. "Easy for you to say when you got everything." "Not everything," I countered. "I got responsibility. I got obligation. I got the duty to preserve something Grandma valued deeply. And if you think that's a prize to be won rather than a burden to be carried, then you really didn't know her at all." Durant closed his leather portfolio with a snap. This has been enlightening, but I believe we have enough information to proceed. Mrs. Prescott, Mr. Prescott, shall we continue this discussion at my office? They nodded, gathering their things. As they moved toward the door, Vanessa paused beside me. You know, she said, her voice low enough that only I could hear. I always thought you were the good sister, the kind one. But this shows your true colors, doesn't it? You wanted Greenfields all along, and you found a way to get it. The accusation stung, but I met her gaze steadily. I never asked for this, Vanessa. But I won't apologize for being the one Grandma trusted to preserve her legacy. Her eyes narrowed. We'll see how much of a legacy is left when the lawyers are finished. With that parting shot, she swept out of the library, Todd and Durant following in her wake. The young assistant trailed after them, finally looking up from her phone to give me a curious glance as she passed. When their footsteps had faded and the front door slammed shut, I sank into Grandma's reading chair, suddenly exhausted. Well, Richard said, breaking the awkward silence, that was intense. Mr. Blackwood sighed, removing his glasses to polish them with a handkerchief. I'm afraid it's only the beginning. Your sister is, he searched for a diplomatic phrase, determined. She's always been that way, I said, rubbing my temples where a headache was forming. Once Vanessa decides she wants something, she doesn't give up until she gets it. In this case, I believe she will have to learn to accept disappointment, Mr. Blackwood said firmly. Your grandmother's wishes were crystal clear, and she took every precaution to ensure they would be honored. Richard shifted uncomfortably. Look, I should probably go. This is between you and Vanessa. I got what Grandma wanted me to have, and I'm good with that. I looked at my cousin with newfound appreciation. Unlike Vanessa, he seemed content with his inheritance, showing none of the entitlement that characterized my sister's reaction. You don't have to go, Richard. This is your home, too. At least the guest house is. Grandma wanted you to have a place. Here. He shrugged. Maybe. But I think I need some space from all this drama. I'll crash with my buddy in town for a while longer, at least until after the funeral. Then we can figure out the guest house situation. After Richard left, Mr. Blackwood sat down across from me, his expression serious. Ms. Mitchell, Cassandra, there are some things you should know that weren't appropriate to discuss in the formal reading. I straightened, sensing the weight of what was coming. What things? Your grandmother was concerned about the financial situations of both your sister and your cousin. Richard has been struggling with unemployment for some time, which is why she allowed him to move into the guest house 2 years ago. His bequest is designed to help him establish independence. I nodded. That matched what I knew of Richard's situation. As for your sister, Mr. Blackwood hesitated. Eleanor had concerns about the Prescotts' financial stability. Despite appearances, there have been some significant losses in recent years. Todd's family money is largely gone, tied up in failed investments. Their lifestyle has been maintained primarily through home equity loans and credit. This was news to me. Vanessa and Todd had always projected an image of affluence, the luxury cars, the designer clothes, the expensive vacations. So that's why she was so desperate to sell Greenfields, I murmured. They need the money. It appears so. Eleanor discovered this when Vanessa approached her last spring about releasing some of the value in the estate. Your grandmother did her own investigation and was troubled by what she found. I leaned back in the chair, trying to process this new information. It cast Vanessa's behavior in a different light, not excusing it, but explaining the desperation behind it. There's more, Mr. Blackwood continued. Eleanor was concerned that if Greenfields passed to Vanessa, it would immediately be sold to satisfy creditors. The trust structure was designed specifically to prevent that outcome. The property can never be sold, only maintained for future generations. So even if Vanessa somehow won her challenge, the result would be the same. The trust is ironclad." He smiled slightly. "Your grandmother was a formidable woman." She certainly was. I glanced around the library, at the carefully organized shelves where Grandma had spent countless hours reading and thinking. Had she sat right here in this chair when she made the decision to entrust Greenfields to me instead of Vanessa? What had gone through her mind? As if reading my thoughts, Mr. Blackwood said gently, "Perhaps now would be a good time to read her letter." I nodded, pulling the envelope from my pocket. The paper was thick, expensive stationery that Grandma reserved for important correspondence. My name was written on the front in her elegant, sloping handwriting. With a deep breath, I broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. "My dearest Cassandra, if you're reading this, then I have left this world, and you have learned of my decision regarding Greenfields. I imagine you're feeling overwhelmed, perhaps even frightened by the responsibility I've placed on your shoulders. That is natural. Great responsibilities should never be taken lightly. I want you to know that this decision was not made on impulse, nor was it made to create division in our family, though I fear that may be an unavoidable consequence. Rather, it was made after years of careful observation and deep reflection on what would best serve not only our family's legacy, but also your own personal growth. You have always been the quiet one, Cassandra, the observer, the one who listens, more than she speaks. Many mistake such qualities for weakness, but I have always seen them for what they truly are: wisdom, thoughtfulness, and a depth of character that reveals itself not in grand gestures, but in consistent, reliable action. When you were a child, after your parents' divorce, I watched you retreat into yourself for a time. But unlike your sister, who sought validation from outside sources, you turned inward, finding strength in your own creativity and resilience. You built yourself back up, piece by piece, never demanding that others notice your pain or praise your recovery. That quiet strength is rare, my dear, and it is precisely what Greenfields needs in its caretaker. This place has stood for generations, not because it was the most magnificent estate, or because its owners were the wealthiest in the county, but because those who loved it understood its true value laid in the continuity it provided, the sense of rootedness in an ever-changing world. Vanessa will be hurt by my decision, and for that, I am truly sorry. I love her dearly, as I love you, but love does not mean giving people what they want. Sometimes it means giving them what they need. What Vanessa needs is not more wealth, to shore up a lifestyle built on appearances, but rather a chance to discover her own intrinsic worth, separate from material possessions. As for you, my Cassandra, what you need is to fully recognize and embrace your own strength. To stop standing in the shadows and step confidently into the light. Taking on Greenfields will force you to do exactly that. You will face challenges, both from within the family and from the practical demands of maintaining such a property. There will be days when you question my judgment in choosing you for this task. On those days, I want you to come into this library, sit in my reading chair, and remember that I chose you not because you were perfect, but because you were perfectly suited to this responsibility. Your appreciation for history, your careful stewardship of resources, your ability to find joy in simple traditions, these are the qualities that will allow Greenfields to thrive under your care. The safe in my bedroom contains documents you will need, including the original deed to the property, family birth and death certificates, and a journal I have kept since purchasing Greenfields with your grandfather 60 years ago. This journal chronicles not just the history of the house, but the lessons we learned in preserving it. I hope you will find it useful and perhaps even continue the tradition with your own observations. There is also a smaller envelope containing a key. This key opens a compartment in the base of the grandfather clock in the foyer, a hiding place known only to me until now. Inside, you will find items I've set aside for you personally, separate from the estate. Finally, my dear girl, remember that while I have made you the trustee of Greenfields, You are not bound to this place against your will. The trust allows for you to live elsewhere and manage the estate from a distance if that better suits your life. What matters is not your physical presence, but your commitment to preserving what Greenfields represents. I am proud of the woman you have become, Cassandra. Your quiet courage, your thoughtful nature, your ability to find beauty in the overlooked corners of life. These qualities have always reminded me of myself at your age. Perhaps that is why I feel so confident in trusting my most precious possession to your care. With all my love, Grandma Eleanor P.S. The blue teapot in the kitchen cabinet, the one with the chip on the spout that I refuse to throw away, contains the recipe for my strawberry shortcake. The one I always claimed was a family secret. It's yours now. Share it wisely. Tears streamed down my face as I finished reading. The letter captured Grandma's voice so perfectly, I could almost hear her speaking the words. Her faith in me was both humbling and terrifying. Could I really be the person she described? The right guardian for a legacy spanning 4 generations? Mr. Blackwood had discreetly moved to the window while I read, giving me privacy. Now he turned back, offering a handkerchief which I gratefully accepted. She saw something special in you, he said quietly. Something worth nurturing. I nodded, unable to speak for a moment as I composed myself. She saw something in Vanessa too, I finally managed. Something that worried her. Indeed, Eleanor was concerned that your sister measures her worth entirely by external markers, wealth, status, appearances. She hoped that by not giving Vanessa what she wanted most, she might force her to reevaluate what truly matters. That seems optimistic, I said, thinking of Vanessa's angry departure and threats of legal action. More likely, she'll just hate me forever. Mr. Blackwood smiled sadly, perhaps, but Eleanor was playing a long game. She always did. He gathered his briefcase and prepared to leave. Take some time to process everything. Review the trust documents when you're ready. My contact information is inside if you have questions. And, Cassandra, he paused at the door, don't let your sister intimidate you. You were chosen for this role for good reasons. Trust your grandmother's judgment, and your own. After he left, I sat in the gathering dusk of the library. Grandma's letter still in my hands. Outside, the wind had picked up, rustling the leaves of the old oak trees that had stood sentinel over Greenfields for longer than any living person could remember. Trees that had witnessed the comings and goings of multiple generations, that had shaded children who grew into adults who then brought their own children to play beneath the same branches. Continuity, legacy. The words from Grandma's letter echoed in my mind. With a deep breath, I rose from the chair and walked to the foyer, stopping before the grandfather clock that had marked the passing hours of my childhood with its solemn chimes. I examined its base carefully, finding a nearly invisible seam in the decorative woodwork. According to Grandma's letter, there should be a hidden compartment, but I would need the key from the safe to access it. I climbed the stairs to the master bedroom, a room I had entered only rarely as an adult, respecting Grandma's private space. It felt strange to enter it now, knowing she would never return. The room was immaculate as always. The 4-poster, bed perfectly made with its hand-stitched quilt, the silver-backed brush and mirror set arranged precisely on the vanity. The safe was behind a painting of Greenfields in springtime, a watercolor Grandpa William had commissioned for their 40th anniversary. I swung the painting outward on its hidden hinge and studied the electronic keypad revealed behind it. Consulting the trust documents Mr. Blackwood had given me, I entered the code 07-12-1954, the date Grandma and Grandpa had purchased Greenfields. The safe opened with a soft click. Inside were several document folders, a leather-bound journal, that must be the one Grandma mentioned in her letter, and a small envelope containing an ornate brass key. I took the key and the journal, then closed the safe, promising myself I would return later to properly examine the documents. Back downstairs, I approached the grandfather clock again. The key fit perfectly into a nearly invisible keyhole at the base of the clock. When I turned it, a small panel slid open, revealing a space about the size of a shoebox. Inside was a velvet pouch and a smaller envelope with my name on it. I opened the envelope first, finding another note in Grandma's handwriting. For Cassandra, who understands that the most valuable things are rarely the most expensive. These belonged to my grandmother, who gave them to me when I became the keeper of our family stories. Now they pass to you, the next keeper. Wear them and remember that true worth isn't measured in carats, but in character. With trembling fingers, I opened the velvet pouch and gasped. Inside was a necklace of delicate filigree silver, set with moonstones that caught the fading light and seemed to glow from within. Accompanying it was a matching bracelet and ring, the craftsmanship exquisite but subtle, nothing flashy or ostentatious, just quietly, undeniably beautiful. I recognized them immediately from old family photographs. Great-great-grandma Mitchell had worn them in her portrait that hung in the upstairs hallway. Unlike the valuable diamonds and sapphires in the jewelry collection Vanessa had inherited, these pieces weren't worth a fortune in monetary terms. Their value lay in their history, in the women who had worn them before me. As I clasped the necklace around my throat, I felt a strange sense of connection to those women, a line stretching back through Grandma Eleanor, through her mother, and her grandmother before her. Women who had preserved green fields through world wars, economic depressions, personal tragedies, and family conflicts. Women who had understood, as I was beginning to understand, that being the keeper of a legacy was both a privilege and a profound responsibility. In that moment, standing in the foyer of the house that was now my charge, I made a silent promise. To Grandma Eleanor, to the Mitchell women who came before her, and to myself. I would protect Greenfields, not just from developers and not just from Vanessa's financial desperation, but from anything that threatened what it represented. I would be worthy of the trust placed in me. The grandfather clock began to chime 7 o'clock, the sound reverberating through the house just as it had for generations. And for the first time since receiving the news of Grandma's death, I felt a sense of peace washing over me. I wasn't alone in this. I was part of something larger than myself, a continuum of caretakers, each doing their best to preserve something precious for those who would come after. Whatever challenges lay ahead with Vanessa, with the estate, with finding my own path forward, I would face them with the quiet strength Grandma had seen in me. The strength I was only now beginning to recognize in myself. The days leading up to Grandma Eleanor's funeral passed in a blur of activity. As the newly appointed trustee of Greenfields, I found myself thrust into responsibilities I'd never anticipated. Finalizing funeral arrangements, fielding calls from distant relatives and friends, and coordinating with Pastor Collins about the service. Through it all, I felt Grandma's presence guiding me, her letter a touchstone I returned to whenever doubt crept in. Vanessa and I maintained a frosty distance. She had moved back to her own home after our confrontation, communicating with me only through terse text messages about funeral details. Richard, true to his word, had stayed with his friend in town, though he stopped by daily to help with preparations and to check on me. "You're handling this really well, you know," he said the evening before the funeral as we sat on the porch swing, watching fireflies emerge in the gathering twilight. Grandma Eleanor would be proud. I smiled, touched by his support. "I'm trying. It still doesn't feel quite real, any of it. Her being gone, the trust, Vanessa's reaction." Richard sighed, pushing the swing gently with his foot. "Van's always been that way, even when we were kids. Remember how she'd throw a fit if she didn't get the biggest slice of birthday cake?" The memory made me laugh despite everything. "And now she wants the whole bakery." "Pretty much." He grew serious. "Look, Cassie, I just want you to know that I'm on your side in all this. Grandma made the right choice putting you in charge. Vanessa would have sold this place in a heartbeat. His straightforward support warmed me more than he could know. In the midst of grief and conflict, it was reassuring to know I wasn't entirely alone. Thanks, Richard. That means a lot. I hesitated, then asked a question that had been nagging. At me. Do you think she'll really go through with contesting the will? He considered this, his expression thoughtful in the fading light. Honestly? Yeah, I do. Vanessa's not used to not getting her way. And from what I've gathered, she and Todd really need the money. Mr. Blackwood mentioned they might be having financial troubles. Richard snorted. Troubles? That's putting it mildly. Todd's last 3 investment ventures tanked completely. The only thing keeping them afloat is appearances and credit cards. This aligned with what Mr. Blackwood had told me, but hearing it from Richard made it more real somehow. It's hard to imagine. They always seem so. Put together? That's the game they're playing. The fancy car is leased. The designer clothes are bought on credit. The country club membership is 3 months behind on dues. It's all smoke and mirrors. He shrugged. My buddy Jake works at the bank. He doesn't give me details, but he's dropped enough hints. I absorbed this information, trying to reconcile it with the image Vanessa had always projected. My sister, the successful one. The one who had married well, who lived in the right neighborhood, who seemed to glide effortlessly through a life of privilege while I worked long hours building my design business from scratch. That actually makes her more dangerous, Richard added. She's desperate, and desperate people do desperate things. His words proved prophetic the very next morning, the day of Grandma Eleanor's funeral. I woke early, the weight of the day already heavy on my shoulders. The service wasn't until 11, but there was still much to do. Final calls to the florist and the funeral home, preparing the house for the reception afterward, and most importantly, centering myself to say goodbye to the woman who had been more mother than grandmother to me. After a quick shower, I made my way downstairs to the kitchen, surprised to find the coffee already brewing. For a moment, my heart leapt foolishly. Had it all been a dream? Was Grandma still here, up early as always to greet the day with her customary cup of black coffee? But the kitchen was empty, the coffee pot set on its automatic timer just as Grandma had always done. A small thing, but it brought fresh tears to my eyes. I poured myself a cup and took it to the sunroom at the back of the house, watching the morning mist rise from the gardens as the sun climbed higher. The peaceful moment was shattered by the sound of the front door opening and closing, followed by hushed voices. I set my coffee down, instantly alert. It was barely 7. Who would be entering the house at this hour? I moved quietly through the kitchen toward the main hall, stopping short at the sight that greeted me. Vanessa, Todd, and 2 men I didn't recognize were standing in the foyer, speaking in low, urgent tones. One of the strangers held what looked like a clipboard and was gesturing toward the grand staircase. It's solid oak, pre-Civil War era, he was saying. Could fetch upwards of $15,000 if we find the right buyer. And the grandfather clock? Todd asked, pointing to the very clock that concealed Grandma's gift to me. That's a genuine William Johnston piece from 1850. Conservatively, I'd say 30,000, possibly more with its provenance. Ice flooded my veins as I realized what was happening. They were appraising the house, taking inventory of its valuable antiques. What the hell do you think you're doing? My voice cut through their conversation like a blade. All 4 heads swiveled toward me. Vanessa recovered first, flashing a brittle smile. Cassie, you're up early. I was hoping we'd be done before you woke up. Done with what, exactly? Cataloging? What you plan to steal? I moved fully into the foyer, arms crossed. The 2 strangers exchanged uncomfortable glances. One of them, an older man with silver hair and a neatly trimmed beard, cleared his throat. Perhaps we should come back another time, Mrs. Prescott. That won't be necessary, Mr. Holloway. Vanessa said smoothly. My sister is just emotional, understandably. Today is our grandmother's funeral, after all. Yes, it is, I agreed, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Which makes this little inventory session not just inappropriate but grotesque. Our grandmother isn't even buried yet, and you're already pricing her possessions. Todd stepped forward, his corporate smile firmly in place. You're misunderstanding the situation, Cassandra. We're simply documenting the contents of the estate for legal purposes. Standard procedure in these circumstances. Standard procedure would involve the trustee, that would be me, and proper legal representation, not sneaking in at dawn with antique dealers. I turned to the two strangers. I'm Cassandra Mitchell, trustee of the Mitchell Family Trust and legal caretaker of this property. And you are? The silver-haired man had the grace to look embarrassed. Herbert Holloway, and Sons Antiques. This is my associate, Bradley Turner. Mrs. Prescott contacted us about providing valuations for insurance purposes. Insurance purposes, I repeated skeptically. How convenient. Well, gentlemen, I'm afraid your services won't be needed. All items in this house are already properly documented and insured through the trust. Now I'll have to ask you to leave. Holloway nodded, clearly relieved to extract himself from the awkward situation. Of course, Ms. Mitchell. Our apologies for the intrusion. He handed me a business card. If you should require our services in the future, please don't hesitate to call. As the two men made their hasty exit, Vanessa's facade of politeness crumbled. You had no right to dismiss them like that. I'm co-executor of Grandma's will. No, Vanessa, you're not. You're a beneficiary, nothing more. I'm the trustee, which gives me sole authority over this property and everything in it. I held my ground, channeling what Grandma had called my quiet strength. For now, Todd interjected, his tone icy. But that will change once the will is invalidated. We're merely being proactive. By trespassing? By bringing strangers into our grandmother's home on the day of her funeral to price her possessions like items at a garage sale? My voice rose despite my efforts to remain calm. Do you have any idea how disrespectful that is? Vanessa's eyes flashed. Don't you dare lecture me about respect. You swooped in at the last minute and somehow convinced Grandma to leave you everything. After I was the one who visited her regularly, who brought the children to see her, who actually maintained a relationship while you were off playing artist in the city. The unfairness of her accusations stung. I called her every week. I visited whenever I could. We were close in ways you wouldn't understand because you were too busy trying to extract financial benefit from her. That's a lie. Vanessa stepped closer, her face flushed with anger. I loved her. I did what was best for her. You tried to sell her home out from under her. The words exploded from me before I could stop them. Mr. Blackwood told me everything, about your meetings with developers, about how devastated she was when she found out, about how that's what prompted her to update her will in the first place. Vanessa paled, then quickly recovered. I was exploring options for her benefit. This place was becoming too much for her to manage. I was trying to help. By selling the home she loved, the home she specifically wanted to preserve for future generations? I shook my head in disbelief. You never even discussed it with her before bringing developers onto the property. She had to find out when one of them called to follow up on the meeting. Todd placed a restraining hand on Vanessa's arm. This isn't productive. We should go home and prepare for the service. To me, he added, this isn't over, Cassandra. Not by a long shot. No, it isn't, I agreed. But for today, just for today, can we put aside our differences and focus on honoring Grandma? She deserves better than this. Something in my plea must have reached Vanessa, because her aggressive posture softened slightly. Fine. For Grandma. She turned to leave, then paused. But don't think I'm giving up, Cassie. That will is going to be overturned, one way or another. After they left, I leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted despite the early hour. The confrontation had drained me, leaving a hollow ache in my chest. Today was supposed to be about saying goodbye to Grandma Eleanor, about celebrating her remarkable life. Instead, it had already devolved into another battle in what was clearly becoming a war over her legacy. I returned to my cooling coffee, in the sunroom, trying to recapture the peaceful moment I'd been enjoying before Vanessa's intrusion. Outside, the gardens were now fully illuminated by the morning sun, dew sparkling on late-blooming roses and the turning leaves of ancient maple trees. Grandma's roses, her pride and joy, cultivated over decades with patience and loving care. Just like she'd cultivated me, I realized, seeing potential where others saw only ordinariness, nurturing strength that was quiet rather than showy, recognizing that true beauty often lay in resilience rather than flashy displays. The realization steadied me. Whatever Vanessa might do, whatever legal battles might lie ahead, I was rooted here just as surely as Grandma's roses, and I would not be easily uprooted. By 10:30, I was dressed in a simple black sheath dress, Grandma's moonstone necklace cool against my skin beneath my collar. Richard arrived to drive us to the church together, his presence a silent support as we made the short journey into town. Willow Creek First Methodist was filled nearly to capacity when we arrived. Grandma Eleanor had been beloved in the community, her generosity and kindness touching countless lives over her 86 years. The front pews were reserved for family, a small group consisting of just Vanessa, Todd, their 2 children Emma and James, Richard, and me. Cousin Marjorie from St. Louis had sent flowers but couldn't make the trip due to health issues. Uncle Robert, Dad's brother, sat in the second row with his wife, their expressions solemn. Pastor Collins conducted a beautiful service, speaking eloquently about Grandma's faith, her service to others, and her unwavering dedication to family and community. Several members of her bridge club and the Garden Society shared memories that made us laugh through our tears. When it came time for family tributes, Vanessa rose first, making her way to the pulpit with practiced grace. My grandmother, Eleanor Mitchell, was the heart of our family, she began, her voice steady but emotional. She taught me the importance of tradition, of dignity, of maintaining standards in all aspects of life. She was always impeccably dressed, her home always perfectly maintained, her manners always flawless. As Vanessa continued her eulogy, I noticed something curious. She spoke extensively about Grandma's external qualities, her social standing, her beautiful home, her refined tastes. But there was very little about who Grandma had been as a person, her quirky sense of humor, her passion for poetry, her habit of sneaking cookies to neighborhood children despite her supposed strict adherence to healthy eating. It was as if Vanessa had loved an idea of Grandma Eleanor rather than the complex, sometimes contradictory woman herself. The realization made me sad for my sister, for what she had missed by focusing so intently on appearances. When it was my turn to speak, I approached the pulpit with trembling knees. Public speaking had never been my forte, another way in which Vanessa and I differed dramatically. But as I looked out at the sea of faces, all gathered to honor the woman who had meant so much to me, the words came naturally. Grandma Eleanor loved beautiful things, I began, but she taught me that beauty isn't what matters most. Pretty is as pretty does, she used to tell me when I was a child upset over some perceived inadequacy compared to my more naturally graceful sister. A gentle ripple of laughter passed through the congregation. Even Vanessa's lips twitched slightly. What mattered to my grandmother wasn't how things looked, but how they endured. She loved her antique furniture not because it was valuable, but because it had stories to tell. She loved her gardens not because they were showpieces, but because they renewed themselves season after season, teaching lessons of patience and resilience. I touched the hidden moonstone necklace beneath my collar, drawing strength from it. Most of all, Grandma Eleanor valued authenticity. She had no patience for pretense or false fronts. "Be yourself," she would say, "because everyone else is taken." It was her favorite piece of advice, one I've carried with me through every challenge in my life. As I spoke about Grandma's wisdom, her quirks, her hidden depths that revealed themselves only to those who took the time to look beyond the surface, I saw recognition in the eyes of those who had truly known her. Mrs. Abernathy from the garden club nodded vigorously. Pastor Collins smiled warmly. Even Uncle Robert, who had sometimes seemed intimidated by his mother-in-law, was wiping away tears. In her final letter to me, I concluded, Grandma Eleanor wrote that the most valuable things are rarely the most expensive. That true worth isn't measured in carats but in character. That's the legacy she leaves us. Not just beautiful possessions or a lovely estate, but a blueprint for living with integrity, courage, and quiet strength. For seeing value in what endures rather than what merely shines. As I returned to my seat, Richard squeezed my hand. Across the aisle, Vanessa stared straight ahead, her expression unreadable. But her daughter Emma, 12 years old and beginning to show signs of the independent spirit that had often put Vanessa at odds with. Our mother gave me a small, shy smile. The service concluded with Grandma's favorite hymn, In the Garden, its simple melody carrying memories of Sunday mornings at Greenfields, Grandma humming as she arranged flowers from her garden for the table. As the final notes faded, Pastor C. Collins invited everyone to join the family at Greenfields for a reception. The procession to the cemetery was brief but poignant. Watching Grandma's casket being lowered into the ground beside Grandpa William made the finality of her passing real in a way the service hadn't. She was truly gone. Whatever guidance she might offer now would have to come from memory and the written words she'd left behind. By the time we returned to Greenfields, the catering staff I'd arranged had everything prepared. The sprawling lawn behind the house was set with tables and chairs, while inside, the formal dining room hosted an elegant buffet. Grandma would have approved of the tasteful arrangements, the abundance of flowers from her own gardens, the quiet classical music playing in the background. As I stood greeting guests, accepting condolences and sharing memories, I watched Vanessa working the crowd with practiced charm. She moved from group to group, leaning in for conversations, touching arms sympathetically, laughing graciously at appropriate moments. To anyone observing, she appeared the perfect grieving granddaughter, poised and dignified despite her loss. Only someone who knew her well would notice the calculation behind her smiles, the way her eyes continually swept the room, assessing who was present and who wasn't. Once I caught her running a manicured finger along the edge of an antique sideboard, as if mentally calculating its value. The reception continued well into the afternoon. Gradually, guests began to depart, offering final condolences and promises to check in soon. By 4 o'clock, only a handful remained, mostly elderly friends of Grandma's who seemed reluctant to leave the home where they'd spent so many pleasant hours. I was speaking with Mrs. Abernathy about Grandma's prized Damascus roses when a commotion from upstairs caught my attention. Raised voices followed by a crash. Excusing myself, I hurried toward the grand staircase, my heart racing. At the top of the stairs, I nearly collided with Emma, Vanessa's daughter, who was running down in tears. "Emma? What's wrong? What was that noise?" She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Mom and Dad are fighting. In Great-Grandma's room." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "They're looking for something in her dresser. Mom knocked over the mirror because Dad said they shouldn't be doing it today." Anger surged through me, hot and immediate. "Thank you for telling me, Emma. Why don't you go find Uncle Richard in the garden? I'm sure he could use some help passing out those cookies you and I made yesterday." Once Emma was safely headed outside, I climbed the stairs and marched directly to Grandma's bedroom. The door was ajar, and I could hear Vanessa and Todd arguing in hushed but intense voices. "Told you this wasn't the right time," Todd was saying. People are still downstairs, for God's sake. There won't be another opportunity, Vanessa hissed back. Once Cassie moves in, we'll never get access to… I pushed the door open, fully. Access to what, exactly? They froze like guilty teenagers caught sneaking out. Vanessa stood by Grandma's dresser, several drawers pulled open, their contents in disarray. Todd was crouched in front of the closet, rummaging through shoeboxes. On the floor lay Grandma's silver-backed mirror, its glass cracked from the fall. "What are you doing?" I demanded, though the answer was painfully obvious. "This is her funeral, for God's sake." Vanessa recovered quickly, closing the drawer she'd been searching. "We're looking for family photos, actually, for the children. Memories of their great-grandmother." The lie was so transparent it would have been laughable if the situation weren't so appalling. In her jewelry box? In shoe boxes at the back of her closet? "Try again, Vanessa." Todd stood, brushing dust from his knees. "Look, Cassandra, there's no need to make a scene. We're simply collecting some personal items that Eleanor had promised to Vanessa." "Like what?" I challenged. "What specifically? Did Grandma promise you that you need to search for it in secret during her funeral reception?" Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "The diamond tennis bracelet, for one. It was Grandma's mother's. Our great-grandmother's. She always said it would come to me." "Then it would have been specified in the will," I pointed out. "Everything of value was cataloged and designated." "Not everything," Vanessa insisted. "Grandma kept some things separate. Special pieces that weren't part of the official estate. Family heirlooms meant to be passed down directly." Like the moonstone set now hidden beneath my collar, I thought. But Vanessa couldn't know about that, the hidden compartment in the… Grandfather clock had been Grandma's secret, shared only with me through her letter. "Even if that were true," I said carefully, "this isn't the way to go about it. Searching her room while guests are still downstairs mourning her? Can't you see how disrespectful that is?" Todd at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. I told her we should wait. Do this properly with you present. "Because you're such a stickler for propriety," I said sarcastically. "Is that why you were having antique dealers appraise the house at dawn this morning?" Vanessa's face flushed with anger. "You don't understand the pressure we're under. The financial obligations. This estate represents security for our children's future. And yet Grandma chose to preserve it intact, rather than liquidate it for your benefit. That should tell you something about what she valued most." I stepped fully into the room, standing my ground. "Now, I'm going to ask both of you to leave. There are still guests downstairs who genuinely cared about Grandma Eleanor, who aren't here to assess what they can get from her." "This isn't over," Vanessa said, the same threat she'd made that morning. "We'll be back with our lawyer, proper documentation, legal access." "You do that," I replied evenly. "In the meantime, I'll be changing the locks." After they stormed out, I surveyed the damage to Grandma's previously immaculate room. Drawers half open, possessions disturbed, the beautiful mirror cracked beyond repair. Methodically, I began restoring order, returning delicate scarves to their drawer, replacing displaced jewelry boxes, arranging shoes back in their proper spaces. As I worked, my hand brushed something unusual tucked at the back of the closet shelf, a leather-bound book I hadn't noticed before. Curious, I pulled it out and opened it to find not a book, but a disguised lockbox. There was no keyhole, just a small combination dial on the front. For a moment, I considered leaving it alone. Perhaps this was what Vanessa had been searching for, and opening it would only give her more ammunition in her fight for Grandma's possessions. But curiosity won out. If Grandma had hidden something deliberately, I should know what it was in order to protect it. The combination was unlikely to be random. Grandma had always used meaningful dates for passwords and codes. I tried her birthday first, 05/22/1938. The lock didn't budge. Next, I tried Grandpa William's birthday, 11/30/1936. Still nothing. I paused, thinking carefully. What date would have been significant enough for Grandma to use, but not immediately obvious to others? On a hunch, I tried. The date she and Grandpa had purchased Greenfields, 07/12 the 1954, the same date that opened the safe behind the painting. With a soft click, the lock released. Inside was a stack of papers bound with a faded blue ribbon, and a folded note addressed simply, "For the Keeper." With trembling fingers, I unfolded it. To the Keeper of Greenfields. If you are reading this, you have found what Vanessa has been searching for since she learned of its existence 3 years ago. What you hold in your hands is not jewelry or deeds or anything of conventional value. Rather, it is the full history of Greenfields and the Mitchell family, the unvarnished truth, including aspects I have never spoken of openly. Every family has its secrets, its painful chapters. Ours is no exception. The documentation here reveals how Greenfields came into our possession originally, not through purchase as the official story goes, but through a complex arrangement involving the previous owners, the Harrington family, and their financial collapse following the Great Depression. These papers include the original deed transfer, correspondence that explains the true circumstances, and my personal account of what I learned years after the fact. I have kept this information secure, not out of shame, but out of respect for both families' privacy and to protect the legacy of Greenfields itself. As keeper, you must decide what to do with this knowledge. Use it wisely, compassionately, and only if necessary to protect what matters most. Eleanor Mitchell. I stared at the note, then at the stack of documents beneath it. What secret about Greenfield's past had Grandma felt the need to hide so carefully? And how had Vanessa learned of its existence? The answers, I suspected, lay in the papers I now held, papers that might provide context for Grandma's decisions, and perhaps even ammunition in the legal battle Vanessa seemed determined to wage. But this wasn't the time or place to delve into family secrets, not with mourners still gathered below, celebrating Grandma's life. I returned everything to the lockbox, secured it, and tucked it carefully into my own room for later examination. Whatever revelations it contained would have to wait until I had privacy and time to process them fully. Downstairs, the reception was winding down. Richard had noticed my extended absence and given me a questioning look as I rejoined the gathering, but I just shook my head slightly. Later, that gesture promised. Not now. By evening, the last guests had departed. The catering staff had cleaned up, and Richard had gone back to his friend's place in town, promising to return the next day to help with whatever I needed. I was, at last, alone in the house that was now my responsibility. In the quiet of Grandma Eleanor's, my library, I poured a small glass of the brandy she had kept for special occasions. Outside, darkness had fallen completely, wrapping Greenfields in the velvet embrace of a cloudless autumn night. Stars glittered above the old oaks and maples, the same stars that had watched over this property for generations. "I hope I'm doing this right, Grandma," I whispered into the silence. "I hope I'm being the keeper you believed I could be." There was no answer, of course. Just the subtle creaking of the old house settling, the distant hoot of an owl from the woods at the property's edge, and the steady, reassuring tick of the grandfather clock in the foyer, marking the passage of time as it had for more than a century, before any of us were born, and continuing long after we would all be gone. In that moment, I understood something essential about my role here. I wasn't the owner of Greenfields. I was merely its current caretaker. My task wasn't to possess it, but to preserve it, to ensure that its beauty, its history, and its spirit remained intact for future generations. With that realization came a profound sense of purpose, stronger than any I'd felt before. Whatever Vanessa might do, whatever secrets the lockbox might contain, I was now the keeper of Greenfields, and I would not fail in that sacred trust. The morning after the funeral dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through the windows of my childhood bedroom. For a moment, disoriented by sleep, I forgot everything. Grandma's death, the will reading, Vanessa's threats, the mysterious lockbox. Then reality crashed back, and I lay still, gathering my strength for the day ahead. A text message from Richard broke the morning silence. Coming by at 10, bringing donuts and reinforcements. Reinforcements? I wondered what he meant as I showered and dressed in comfortable jeans and a sweater. No more funeral clothes, no more formal mourning. Today was about beginning the process of settling into my new role as keeper of Greenfields. After a quick breakfast, I returned to my room for the lockbox. Whatever family secrets it contained, I needed to know them before Vanessa made her next move. I carried it to the library, settled into Grandma's reading chair, and opened it once more. The documents inside were organized chronologically, beginning with yellowed correspondence from 1954, the year Grandma and Grandpa had supposedly purchased Greenfields. The first letter, written on formal stationery, was from a Margaret Harrington to my grandfather. June 4th, 1954. Dear Mr. Mitchell, I've considered your proposal regarding Greenfields. While the arrangement is unconventional, I believe it offers the best solution to an impossible situation. My father would be devastated to see our family home auctioned off to strangers after 4 generations of Harringtons have called it home. Your offer to allow me to remain in residence in the guest house for the remainder of my life is generous, as is your promise to preserve the estate intact rather than subdividing it as others have proposed. Most importantly, your willingness to keep the true nature of this transaction private protects what remains of my father's reputation in the community. I accept your terms. My attorney will draw up the necessary documents, recording the sale at the agreed-upon nominal amount for legal purposes. The actual financial arrangement we've discussed will remain between us. Sincerely, Margaret Harrington. I frowned, trying to understand what this meant. The nominal amount suggested that Grandpa William hadn't paid full market value for Greenfields. But if that was the case, what was the actual financial arrangement mentioned? The next document provided a partial answer, a deed of sale showing that William and Eleanor Mitchell had purchased Greenfields from the Harrington estate for $12,000, an amount that would have been far below market value even in 1954. Accompanying, it was a handwritten note from Grandpa to someone named James Porter. Jim, the arrangements are complete. The property transfers to us officially next month. Margaret will stay in the guest house as agreed. For all official purposes, we purchased Greenfields outright. The truth, that we're essentially acting as stewards to prevent the estate's dismantling and the exposure of Edward Harrington's financial misdeeds, remains known only to us, Margaret, and now you as my attorney. Eleanor is uncomfortable with the deception, but agrees it's best for all concerned, especially considering how the revelations about Edward's embezzlement would affect the community organizations that trusted him with their funds. In 20 years, when this is all blown over, perhaps the full story can be told. Until then, we maintain the fiction that we bought the property conventionally. Regards, William. I sat back, stunned. According to these documents, my grandparents hadn't actually purchased Greenfields in the traditional sense. They had become its caretakers to protect both the property and the reputation of the previous owner, who had apparently embezzled funds from community organizations. Further letters revealed more details. Edward Harrington, a respected businessman and community leader, had been secretly misappropriating funds from the charities and organizations he managed. When confronted privately by my grandfather, who had discovered discrepancies while doing accounting work for one of those organizations, Harrington had suffered a fatal heart attack. His daughter Margaret, the only Harrington heir, had been left with a choice: sell Greenfields to pay the debts her father had accumulated, or find another solution. That solution had been my grandparents. They had provided funds to quietly repay the embezzled money. in exchange for taking ownership of Greenfields at a nominal price. Margaret had been allowed to live out her days in the guest house, and the truth about Edward Harrington's crimes had been concealed to protect both his memory and the organizations that would have been damaged by the scandal. It was an arrangement born of compassion rather than greed. My grandparents protecting a family legacy and a community's faith, rather than taking advantage of a tragic situation. But it also meant that, technically, they had acquired Greenfields through means that weren't entirely transparent. The final document in the stack was a letter from Grandma Eleanor, dated just last year. To the keeper of Greenfields, I've never shared the true story of how Greenfields came into our family, partly to honor William's promise to Margaret Harrington, who passed away in 1986, and partly because it never seemed relevant to our legitimate stewardship of the property. However, 3 years ago, Vanessa discovered an old letter William had kept in his desk, a thank you note from Margaret that referenced our special arrangement. She confronted me, demanding to know what it meant. I deflected her questions, but she remained suspicious. Since then, she has been searching for documentation of the original transaction, convinced it would somehow invalidate our ownership and potentially provide leverage for her to claim Greenfields outright. What she doesn't understand is that the arrangement, while unusual, was entirely legal. The property was properly transferred, taxes were paid, and our stewardship has been above reproach for decades. Nevertheless, I fear she may try to use this history to challenge the trust I've established. If she does, these documents provide the complete story, not the twisted version she might construct from fragments. Remember, Greenfields was saved through compassion and integrity, not acquired through deception. Our family's stewardship has always been legitimate, even if its beginning was unconventional. With love and faith in you, Eleanor Mitchell. I closed the folder slowly, my mind racing. So this was what Vanessa had been searching for, evidence of some impropriety in how my grandparents had acquired Greenfields. She must believe it would give her leverage to overturn the trust and claim the property for herself. Would it work? The arrangement had been unusual, certainly, but as Grandma noted, the actual property transfer had been legal. Still, if Vanessa twisted the story, emphasizing the secretive nature of the deal and the below-market purchase price, could she create enough doubt to challenge our family's ownership? The doorbell interrupted my thoughts. I carefully returned the documents to the lockbox and hid it in the secret compartment of Grandma's desk before going to answer the door. Richard stood on the porch, a pink bakery box in his hands. Behind him was a woman I didn't immediately recognize, tall, with short silver hair and sharp, intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses. "Morning, Cassie," Richard said. "I brought reinforcements. Like I promised, this is Diana Winters. She's a paralegal at Blackwood's firm, and she's worked with Grandma Eleanor on the trust stuff for months." Diana extended her hand. "Ms. Mitchell, Howard thought you might appreciate some practical assistance today. There's a considerable amount of paperwork involved in taking over as trustee, and he thought a friendly guide might be helpful." I shook her hand, relieved at the prospect of expert help. "Please, call me Cassandra. And yes, I could definitely use some guidance. Come in, both of you." As we settled in the kitchen with coffee and the donuts Richard had brought, Diana efficiently organized several folders she'd pulled from her briefcase. "I've prepared an overview of immediate actions you'll need to take as trustee," she explained, sliding a document toward me. "Bank accounts to transfer, utilities to update, insurance, policies to review. Howard has already filed the necessary legal papers to officially register you as trustee, but there's still quite a bit of practical work to be done." "I appreciate this," I said sincerely. "It's all a bit overwhelming." Diana smiled warmly. "That's perfectly normal. Most people don't step into a role like this with any prior experience. But from everything Mrs. Mitchell told me about you, I believe you're more than capable." "Grandma talked about me?" I was surprised. Grandma had always been rather private about family matters. Extensively, Diana confirmed. She was very confident in her choice of you as trustee. Said you had exactly the right temperament for the role, patient, thoughtful, and more concerned with preservation than prestige. Her words warmed me, reinforcing that Grandma's decision hadn't been arbitrary or impulsive, but based on careful consideration of who would best serve Greenfield's interests. We spent the next 2 hours going through paperwork, creating a schedule of tasks to be completed over the coming weeks. Diana was thorough and organized, anticipating questions before I could ask them. Richard helped where he could, but mostly occupied himself with minor repairs around the house that he'd noticed needed attention. "There's one more thing Howard asked me to discuss with you," Diana said as we concluded the formal business. "It concerns your sister's likely legal challenge." I tensed. "Has she already filed something?" "Not yet, but Maxwell Durant contacted our office yesterday evening, requesting a meeting with Howard. He mentioned newly discovered information that casts doubt on the validity of the Mitchell Trust." "The Harrington papers," I murmured, then caught myself. "Sorry, just thinking aloud." Diana gave me a shrewd look. "Howard mentioned there might be some historical complications regarding the original acquisition of Greenfields. Nothing that affects the trust's validity, but potentially something your sister might try to exploit." I hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal. Grandma's letter had emphasized the importance of discretion, but Diana clearly already knew something about the situation. "I found some documents," I admitted. "Letters and papers that explain how my grandparents came to own Greenfields. It wasn't exactly the straightforward purchase that's been the official story." "May I ask the nature of these documents?" Diana's tone was professional but gentle. I made a decision. "I think it would be better if Mr. Blackwood saw them directly. They're complicated, but they suggest my grandparents helped conceal some financial impropriety by the previous owner in exchange for acquiring the property at below market value." Diana nodded thoughtfully. "That could indeed be what Durant is referring to, especially if your sister has found partial information about the arrangement. Howard will want to review the complete documentation as soon as possible." "I'll bring everything to his office tomorrow," I promised. After Diana left, armed with my assurance that I would follow the action plan we'd developed, Richard helped me change the locks on all the exterior doors, a precaution that seemed prudent given Vanessa's previous uninvited entry. "Do you think she'll really try to use these old papers to challenge the trust?" Richard asked as he tightened the last screw on the new front door deadbolt. "I'm sure of it," I replied. "She's desperate, Richard. You said it yourself. She and Todd are in financial trouble, and they see Greenfields as their salvation." He stood, testing the new lock with its key. "Maybe, but from what you've described, there's nothing in those papers that actually invalidates Grandma's trust. The property was legally transferred to our grandparents, regardless of the circumstances." "True, but Vanessa doesn't need to actually win in court. She just needs to create enough legal complications that I might be willing to settle, to give her a portion of the estate just to make the problem go away." Richard's expression darkened. "You wouldn't do that, would you? After everything Grandma did to protect this place?" "Never," I said firmly. "Greenfield stays intact just as Grandma wanted. But that doesn't mean the fight won't be ugly and expensive." "Well, you're not in it alone." Richard placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "I've got your back, and it sounds like Blackwood's firm does too." His support meant more than he could know. In the days since Grandma's death, Richard had become not just a cousin but a true ally, something I hadn't expected given our relatively distant relationship growing up. After Richard left, promising to return the next day to help with more practical matters around the estate, I found myself drawn back to the library. The afternoon sun cast warm patterns on the Persian rug where Grandma had taught me to play chess as a child, patiently explaining strategies beyond my years in the belief that I would grow into them, which, eventually, I had. I ran my fingers along the spines of her beloved books, classics, historical biographies, botanical references, and poetry collections. So many worlds contained within these walls, so much knowledge and beauty preserved through her careful stewardship. Taking a leather-bound volume of Wordsworth from the shelf, Grandma's favorite poet, I settled into her reading chair and opened to a random page. A pressed flower fell into my lap, a dried violet preserved between the pages. Beside it, Grandma had penciled a small note. From William's garden, our first spring at Greenfields. Such a small thing, this dried violet, monetarily worthless, yet priceless in its representation of love and memory. How many such treasures were hidden throughout Greenfields? How many small, perfect moments of joy and connection had been preserved in these walls? This was what Vanessa couldn't see, I realized. To her, Greenfields was an asset, valuable real estate, antique furniture, a prestigious address. But its true worth lay in these invisible layers of history and emotion, the accumulated love and care of generations who had called it home. My phone buzzed with a text message, pulling me from my reflections. It was from Emma, Vanessa's daughter. "Can I come see you tomorrow? Alone? It's important." The request surprised me. Emma and I had always gotten along well, but she was only 12, not old enough to drive herself, and certainly not independent enough to make social calls without her mother's knowledge or approval. I texted back, "Of course. How will you get here?" The reply came quickly. "Mom has yoga at 10. Dad's playing golf. I'll ride my bike. Please don't tell them." The secretive nature of the request concerned me, but I couldn't bring myself to refuse. "Okay, I'll see you around 10:30. Be careful on the roads." What could Emma possibly want to discuss that required such secrecy? I wondered. Whatever it was, the fact that she was turning to me rather than her parents suggested it was something significant. The rest of the day passed in a blur of practical tasks, responding to condolence messages, organizing Grandma's personal papers, beginning the inventory of household items required for the trust documentation. By evening, I was exhausted, but satisfied with the progress I'd made. Greenfields was beginning to feel less like Grandma's house and more like my responsibility, a subtle but important shift. I was preparing a simple dinner when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Vanessa Prescott. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but then decided that avoiding confrontation wouldn't solve anything. "Hello, Vanessa," I answered, keeping my tone neutral. "Cassandra." Her voice was clipped, formal. "I'm calling to inform you that our lawyer will be filing papers tomorrow morning contesting Grandma's will and the trust arrangement." I took a deep breath, steeling myself. On what grounds? Fraudulent acquisition of property, improper transfer of assets, undue influence. She rattled off the legal terms like items on a shopping list. "Mr. Durant believes we have a very strong case." Based on what? Some fragmentary information about how Grandpa and Grandma acquired Greenfields almost 70 years ago? That has nothing to do with the validity of the trust Grandma established last year. There was a slight pause. "So, you found the papers," she said, her voice suddenly intent. "Where? Tell me where they were hidden." "That's not relevant, Vanessa. What matters is that you're misinterpreting history in an attempt to overturn Grandma's clear wishes. It won't work." "You have no idea what you're talking about," she snapped. "Those documents prove that this property was acquired through deception. Grandpa and Grandma helped cover up a crime in exchange for Greenfields. It invalidates everything." "No, it doesn't," I countered calmly. "It shows that they acted compassionately to protect a family's reputation while preserving a historic property. Everything was legally transferred. Taxes were paid, ownership was properly recorded. "We'll let a judge decide that," Vanessa said coldly. "In the meantime, I'm putting you on notice. Don't remove anything from the house. Don't make any changes to the property, and don't access any of the trust funds. Once we file, all assets will be frozen pending resolution." "That's not how it works, Vanessa. The trust is a separate legal entity from the will. Mr. Blackwood has already explained this to you." "Blackwood is biased," she dismissed. "He helped Grandma set up this unfair arrangement in the first place. Of course he'll defend it." I could hear the desperation beneath her anger, the fear driving her attacks. For a moment, I considered telling her what I knew about her financial situation, about how Grandma had been trying to protect Greenfields from being sold to pay off Todd's debts. But revealing that knowledge would only escalate the conflict. Instead, I said simply, "I'm sorry you feel that way, Vanessa. I truly am. But fighting like this isn't what Grandma would have wanted. She loved both of us." "Don't," she warned, her voice tight. "Don't pretend you know what she would have wanted when you manipulated her into cutting me out. You've shown your true colors, Cassie. You're not the sweet, innocent sister you've always pretended to be. You're calculating and selfish, and I'll make sure everyone knows it." The accusation stung, especially because it was so contrary to the truth. I had never asked for Greenfields, never even imagined Grandma would entrust it to me rather than Vanessa. But defending myself would only fuel her anger. "I'm not going to argue with you," I said quietly. "Whatever legal action you take, we'll respond appropriately. But my door is always open if you want to talk, sister to sister, without lawyers between us." "Save your sanctimonious crap," she spat. "The next time we talk will be in court." The line went dead. I set the phone down, hands trembling slightly from the adrenaline of confrontation. Despite anticipating Vanessa's attack, the reality of it, the naked hostility in her voice, the personal accusations, had shaken me more than I wanted to admit. I abandoned my half-prepared dinner, appetite gone, and walked instead to the front porch. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. Stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, the same stars that had witnessed every drama played out at Greenfields over its long history. How many family conflicts had this old house seen? How many rivalries, disappointments, and reconciliations? The thought was oddly comforting. This current storm was just one more chapter in its ongoing story, a story that would continue long after Vanessa and I had played our parts and exited the stage. I sat on the porch swing, pushing gently with my foot to set it in motion. The rhythmic creaking of its chains was soothing, familiar. As a child, I'd spent countless hours on this swing, reading books from Grandma's library, sketching the gardens, or simply watching the changing light on the distant hills. It had been my thinking place, my dreaming place. Now, as the property's guardian, I found myself returning to it instinctively, seeking both comfort and clarity. What would Grandma advise if she were here? How would she handle Vanessa's threats and accusations? With dignity, I decided. With patience and perspective. Not by responding in kind to attacks, but by remaining steady in her commitment to what mattered most, the preservation of Greenfields and the values it represented. I could do no less. Whatever legal battle lay ahead, I would face it not with Vanessa's desperate aggression, but with the quiet strength Grandma had always seen in me. The strength I was only now beginning to fully recognize in myself. As darkness settled completely, I returned inside, locking the door behind me with the new key. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the meeting with Mr. Blackwood, Emma's mysterious visit, perhaps even the formal filing of Vanessa's legal challenge. But for tonight, Greenfield stood peaceful and protected under my watch. I climbed the Huey stairs to my bedroom, pausing briefly outside Grandma's door. Soon I would need to decide whether to move into the master suite or keep it as it was, a kind of memorial to her presence. Not yet, though. Some transitions couldn't be rushed. In my own room, I opened the window slightly, allowing the night sounds of the estate to filter in, the distant hooting of an owl, the rustle of wind through ancient trees, the occasional call of a whippoorwill from the meadow beyond the gardens. These were the sounds that had lulled generations of Mitchells to sleep within these walls. As I drifted toward sleep, Grandma's words from her letter echoed in my mind. You were chosen not because you were perfect, but because you were perfectly suited to this responsibility. I would try my best to prove her right. Morning arrived with a gentle rain tapping against my bedroom window. I woke early, mind already spinning with the day's agenda, meeting with Mr. Blackwood to discuss the Harrington papers, preparing for Emma's mysterious visit, and beginning the process of truly settling into Greenfields. Over coffee at the kitchen table, I reviewed the action plan Diana had created yesterday. First on the list, inventory valuable items for insurance purposes. Given Vanessa's interest in Grandma's jewelry and antiques, documenting everything properly seemed especially important now. I was just finishing my second cup when the doorbell rang, far too early for Emma's visit. Through the peephole, I saw a delivery person in a courier uniform holding a large envelope. When I opened the door, he handed me the package with a polite smile. Delivery for Cassandra Mitchell, he said. Needs a signature. I signed for the envelope, noting the return address. Durant Legal Associates. Vanessa hadn't wasted any time. Back in the kitchen, I opened it to find a formal legal notice. Petition to invalidate trust and contest will. The document was thick with legal terminology, alleging everything from undue influence to fraudulent. Property acquisition to mental incompetence on Grandma's part. My stomach twisted with a mixture of anger and sadness. Were we really going to do this? Turn our grandmother's final wishes into a courtroom battle? Drag family history through legal proceedings? I set the papers aside, unwilling to let them dominate my morning, and called Mr. Blackwood's office. I've just received legal papers from Maxwell Durant, I told his assistant, and I have those historical documents I mentioned to Diana. Could I come in earlier than our scheduled appointment? Mr. Blackwood expected this, she replied. He can see you at 9:30. Perfect. That would still leave me time to return to Greenfields before Emma's arrival. I hurried upstairs to retrieve the lockbox from its hiding place, then dressed in clothes that struck a balance between professional and comfortable, dark jeans, a silk blouse, and a tailored blazer. The moonstone necklace went on last, hidden, beneath my collar as before, a private talisman of strength. The drive to Mr. Blackwood's office took me through downtown Willow Creek, past the small businesses and municipal buildings that had changed little in my lifetime. The law offices of Blackwood, Turner, and Associates occupied the same building where the will had been read, their brass nameplate discreet but authoritative. Mr. Blackwood was waiting in his office, a spacious room lined with law books and framed credentials. The large wooden desk that dominated the space was neatly arranged, with a single folder centered on its polished surface. Ms. Mitchell, he greeted me, rising to shake my hand. I was sorry to hear about the legal filing, but not surprised. Maxwell Durant has a reputation for aggressive tactics. I brought the documents I mentioned to Diana, I said, placing the lockbox on his desk. They explain the original acquisition of Greenfields. I think Vanessa has partial information about this history and believes it gives her leverage. As I explained the combination to the lockbox, I summarized what I'd learned from the papers inside. The arrangement between my grandparents and Margaret Harrington, the financial improprieties they had helped conceal, and the below-market transfer of the property. Mr. Blackwood examined each document carefully, his expression neutral but attentive. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. Interesting, he said finally. but not particularly damaging from a legal perspective. The property transfer was properly executed and recorded with the county. Taxes were paid. The consideration may have been below market value, but that's not illegal. People sell property for less than it's worth all the time, for various personal reasons. So Vanessa can't use this to invalidate the trust? Not directly, no. She might try to argue that your grandparents acquired the property through some sort of fraud or deception, but the documents don't support that interpretation. They show a compassionate arrangement that protected multiple parties' interests. Relief washed over me. That's what I thought, but I'm not a lawyer. However, Mr. Blackwood cautioned, this doesn't mean the legal challenge will be easily dismissed. Durant is making multiple claims: mental incompetence, undue influence, improper trust formation. Each will need to be addressed. He opened the folder on his desk. I've prepared an initial response to the petition. We'll file it this afternoon, requesting an expedited hearing on the validity of the trust. The sooner we can establish the trust's legitimacy, the sooner you'll be free to fully execute your responsibilities as trustee without interference. The rest of our meeting focused on practical strategy, documents I should gather, witnesses who might testify to Grandma's mental clarity, evidence of her long-standing intentions regarding Greenfields. By the time we concluded, I felt more confident about the legal battle ahead, even as I regretted its necessity. One more thing, Ms. Mitchell, Mr. Blackwood said as I prepared to leave. Eleanor left a sealed envelope with our firm to be delivered to you 1 week after her funeral. That will be tomorrow. Would you like me to have it couriered to Greenfields, or would you prefer to collect it personally? Another message from Grandma? My heart skipped. I'll come pick it up myself. On the drive back to Greenfields, my mind raced with questions. What else had Grandma felt the need to tell me? Why wait until a week after the funeral? The timing suggested she had anticipated the conflict with Vanessa, had expected that my sister would challenge the trust almost immediately. I arrived home with just enough time to gather my thoughts before Emma's visit. The house felt especially quiet after the intensity of the legal meeting, its spaces holding memories rather than threats. I made a pot of hot chocolate, Emma's favorite, and set out the chocolate chip cookies I'd baked the previous evening in a fit of restlessness. At precisely 10:35, I spotted Emma's purple bicycle turning into the long driveway. She pedaled quickly, her backpack bouncing against her slim shoulders, blonde hair streaming behind her. Despite the circumstances, the sight made me smile. Emma had Vanessa's looks, but none of her calculated grace. She moved with the unself-conscious energy of a child not yet concerned with appearances. I met her at the front door. Right on time. I've got hot chocolate and cookies in the kitchen. She propped her bike against the porch railing and gave me a quick, shy hug. Thanks for letting me come. Mom doesn't know. So you mentioned. I led her inside, noting how her eyes darted around the foyer, taking in details as if seeing them for the first time. Is everything okay, Emma? She waited until we were settled at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of cocoa, before answering. Not really. Mom and Dad have been fighting a lot. About the house, about money, about you. I kept my expression neutral, not wanting to put her in the middle. I'm sorry to hear that. It must be tough for you and James. She nodded, taking a sip of cocoa. James doesn't really understand. He's only 8, but I do. Her expression turned serious beyond her years. Mom's really angry about great-grandma's will. She says you tricked her somehow. What do you think? I asked gently. Emma considered this, absently breaking a cookie into small pieces. I don't think you tricked anyone. Great-grandma Eleanor was too smart for that. She always knew exactly what was going on. I smiled at her perceptiveness. She certainly did. That's kind of why I'm here, Emma said, leaning forward slightly. I found something in Mom's study. Something that belongs here, I think. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a small, leather-bound book with a faded maroon cover. I recognized it immediately. Grandma's journal, the one she'd mentioned in her letter that should have been in the safe behind the painting. "Where did you get this?" I asked, taking it carefully. "Mom brought it home after the funeral. I heard her tell Dad it was evidence of great-grandma's mental decline, that she'd written crazy things in it. But I read some of it, and it doesn't sound crazy at all. It sounds like great-grandma." I opened the journal, confirming it was indeed Grandma's distinctive handwriting. "Emma, this is really important. Thank you for bringing it back." She fiddled with her cookie crumbs, not meeting my eyes. "There's more. Mom took other stuff too. Papers from great-grandma's desk, photo albums. I couldn't bring everything, it would be too obvious. But I thought the journal was most important." The information didn't surprise me, given Vanessa's behavior, but Emma's awareness of it did. "How do you feel about your mom taking these things?" Emma's expression clouded. "It doesn't feel right. Great-grandma left the house to you, not Mom." And she hesitated, clearly struggling with loyalty. "And Mom keeps talking about selling everything once she wins the court case. The furniture, the china, even great-grandma's rose bushes to some fancy garden place. She says we need the money." My heart sank. So Vanessa wasn't just planning to challenge my role as trustee, she intended to liquidate Greenfields entirely. Exactly what Grandma had established the trust to prevent. "Emma, I want you to know that you can always visit Greenfields, no matter what happens between your mom and me. This is your heritage too." She smiled, a flash of relief crossing her young face. "That's what great-grandma used to tell me. That the house belongs to all of us in a way, that we're just taking care of it for the future." She was right, I agreed. That's exactly what the trust is designed to ensure, that Greenfields remains intact for generations to come. Emma nodded, then glanced at the antique wall clock. "I should go soon. Mom's yoga class ends at noon, and I need to be home before she is." "Of course. Do you want me to drive you? It's quite a long bike ride." "No, I'll be fine. I don't want anyone to see your car at our house. Mom would know I came here." Her caution saddened me. A 12-year-old shouldn't have to be so strategic about visiting family, but I respected her judgment. "Okay, but text me when you get home safely, all right?" She promised she would, then hugged me tightly before leaving, her thin arms surprisingly strong around my waist. "I'm glad great-grandma picked you," she whispered. "You won't sell her roses." After watching her disappear down the driveway, I returned to the kitchen and opened Grandma's journal. The entries spanned the past 2 years, recording her thoughts, observations about the changing seasons at Greenfields, notes on family visits, and increasingly her concerns about Vanessa and Todd's financial situation. April 15th, 2023. Vanessa visited today with a financial advisor who turned out to be a real estate developer. They thought I was napping when they walked the property, discussing how many luxury homes could be built on parcels this size. When confronted, Vanessa claimed they were merely exploring options for my benefit, as if I'd want to see Greenfields carved into pieces for wealthy strangers. I've suspected for some time that Vanessa and Todd are in financial trouble. Today confirms it. The desperation in her eyes when I refused to discuss selling any part of the property was telling. This isn't just about offering me options. They need money, and they see Greenfields as the solution. I must speak with Howard about protecting the estate. The current will isn't sufficient. Vanessa would sell everything the moment I'm gone. Later entries documented Grandma's growing certainty that I should be Greenfield's guardian, based on her observations of both Vanessa and me over time. Her reasoning was thoughtful and specific, citing instances where Vanessa had demonstrated prioritizing material gain over preservation, and moments where I had shown appreciation for the property's history and character. The final entry was dated just 2 weeks before her death. October 12, 2023. All arrangements are complete. The trust is established with Cassandra as trustee. The necessary legal protections are in place. Howard assures me it's as secure as humanly possible. I worry about what this will do to the relationship between my granddaughters. Vanessa will be hurt, angry, perhaps unforgiving. But I've made this decision not out of preference for one over the other, but out of clear-eyed assessment of who will best serve Greenfield's interests. Cassandra doesn't know it yet, but she has always been the true heir to this place, not in terms of ownership, but in terms of understanding. She sees what matters here, beneath the surface value. She appreciates the roses not for their prize-winning blooms but for their resilience, returning year after year despite winter's hardships. I hope someday Vanessa will understand this wasn't a rejection of her, but rather a recognition of Cassandra's unique suitability for this particular responsibility. Each of my granddaughters has her own gifts. This one belongs to Cassandra. I am at peace with my decision, even knowing the conflict it may cause. Some things are worth fighting for. Greenfield's is one of them. I closed the journal, tears blurring. My vision. Grandma's words were a gift, confirmation that her choice had been deliberate and thoughtful, not manipulated or confused as Vanessa was claiming. More than that, they were a window into her mind during those final months, showing her clarity of thought and purpose. The journal would be powerful evidence in countering Vanessa's claims of mental incompetence. But its most precious value to me was personal, the insight it provided into Grandma's reasoning, her careful weighing of what was best for Greenfield's itself, not just for her granddaughters. I placed the journal in the safe behind the painting, alongside the other important documents. Then I made a quick call to Mr. Blackwood, informing him of this new development. He was particularly interested in Emma's revelation about Vanessa removing items from the house after the funeral. That could constitute theft of trust property, he noted. We should document what's missing. Would Emma be willing to provide a statement? I don't want to put her in that position, I said firmly. She's caught in the middle as it is. Understandable. We'll find other ways to establish what's been removed. In the meantime, the journal will be extremely helpful in establishing Eleanor's mental state and intentions. After ending the call, I spent the remainder of the morning continuing the inventory Diana had recommended, carefully photographing and cataloging the antiques, artwork, and collectibles throughout the house. The work was methodical and somewhat tedious, but also surprisingly satisfying, a way of becoming more intimately acquainted with the treasures Grandma had preserved. In the formal dining room, I documented the Limoges china collection that had been passed down through 4 generations, each piece still perfect despite its age. In the sitting room, I cataloged the Victorian cameo collection displayed in a custom-built case, each tiny carved face telling its own story. Throughout the house, I found evidence of careful stewardship, items maintained not just for their monetary value, but for their connection to family history. Around noon, my phone dinged with a text from Emma. Home safe. Mom not back yet. Thanks for the hot chocolate. I smiled, grateful for her thoughtfulness in letting me know she'd arrived safely. Despite the conflict with Vanessa, it was comforting to know that Emma maintained her own connection to Greenfield's and to me. Perhaps she represented hope for healing the family rift someday, when emotions had cooled and perspectives had matured. As I continued my inventory work through the afternoon, my thoughts kept returning to Grandma's journal entries. How long had she been planning the trust arrangement? When exactly had she made the decision that I, not Vanessa, should be Greenfield's guardian? The evolution of her thinking wasn't fully captured in the journal, which began only 2 years ago. I was contemplating this question while cataloging the contents of the library when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Richard's name. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.